Coming.
Just recently, fake sick days were taken, and late night, last minute detailed studying of previously unknown academic institutions most of us can't find on a map dominated households as college basketball's championship tournament known as March Madness took over the television airwaves for 3 incredible weekends. Blue Bloods were demolished. Cinderellas caused way too many obsessed sports fans to tip back way too much out of both frustration and excitement. Legends were born, sometimes infamously, and the explosion in the wagering space since sports fans' simultaneous euphoria and agitation levels through the roof. It was interesting to observe, to say the least, because weeks after storyline hangovers regarding all things Super Bowl, fresh storylines galore dominated 3 recent weeks of headlines. And as I've mentioned before, what should be our country's new nationally observed calendar based on all of our seasons of live sports. It all began with a bang, with tons of new highs, definitely lows in which to pay attention to moving forward, and an unpredictable, hugely energetic culmination to college basketball's March Madness. Let's take a look. We are currently in the beginning of spring. The flowers are beginning to bloom in most places in the country. I think now will be the optimal time to take it all in, all the beauty that's blossoming in most places, hiking, biking, walking, whatever. Get out there and just move your body. However, as expected, the unpredictable nature of live sports content seemed to compel millions to remain captive to the ever-present screens in order to watch or follow all things March Madness, big and small screens. And even though there was a full spectrum of record highs and a few record low viewing numbers throughout most of March Madness, overall, live sports content once again was able to showcase its dominance in capturing the public's attention like no other. In the finely tuned behemoth sports machine, and for this commentary, the college sports machine, its television corporate partners, social media, and wagering partners all benefited greatly. Even before the first tip-off, in anticipation of March Madness, 30-second slots for ads that would play throughout the tournament cost a few $100,000 in the early rounds before rates in the final games of the tournament would command somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.2 to $2.4 million for just a 30-second spot. Although these aren't Super Bowl level cachet numbers, it's definitely in the upper echelon of revenue generation. And there are just a handful of sponsors, I say 17 or so, that dominated the commercial spot space for March Madness. And within that group, there's an upper echelon within that 17, which are typically familiar brands such as Coke, Capital One, and AT&T. I think Capital One's campaign featuring Charles Barkley, Spike Lee, and Sam Jackson, those spots have grown to be some of the most memorable spots in years. So much so that Capital One seems to be doubling and tripling down on the confidence in this particular campaign by injecting traditional notable names into the mix in the campaign going forward, such as Magic Johnson. None of these sponsors are shy at all about betting heavily on their ad investments. Bullish might even be a little bit light in describing the all-in financial confidence that these biggest brands in the world have in investing in their ad spends on the live March Madness tournament. So to give us an idea of what the final ad numbers may be for the recently concluded 2023 March Madness tournament, which generated record viewing numbers for a significant part of the tournament, the spending numbers for some of the major brands in 2022 should give us some idea of where 2023 should land when everything is tallied. So in 2022, Geico and its Gecko, they were the second biggest spender during the 2022 March Madness tournament. They dropped approximately $41 million over those 3 weeks of the tournament for commercial ads through March Madness in 2022. And the big dog of all the spenders for March Madness in 2022 was AT&T by far. And they spent a little more than $66 million on ads. $100+ million on just 2 advertisers. $100+ million on just 2 advertisers. I mean, there's definitely some weight to what detractors have said over the years that the quality of basketball games in college has been greatly diminished with so many one and dones over the past decade or so exiting college early for the NBA. There's a lot of merit to that. However, the ubiquitous access to the elite presentation of live sports today through high-def screens, big and small, our phones, tablets, multiple televisions in just about every single home. No matter where you go, you see it. The exploding wagering space, from emotional wagerers that are basically going for their team to more methodical wagerers that are looking through mountains and mountains of easily accessible data in which we have access today. All of this combines for a very, very strong natural need, in addition to the very strong natural need that we all have as humans to connect, especially for live sporting events and grub, of course. All of this combines, so all of this will grow, in my opinion, in the coming year. So 100 plus million on just 2 advertisers in the past year or so. I think that's going to grow substantially in the next several years, and it's actually going to become the norm and the new foundation from which even more opportunities will grow in the coming years, all based on live sports. As often as I go on and on, some of my friends tell me, talking incessantly about the continued opportunities of capturing eyeballs and pocketbooks through live sports presentations. I'm also increasingly wary of a lot of the storylines that are often pushed by those same broadcasters of live sports presentations and their financial partners. And since this commentary is primarily concerning college basketball's March Madness, I'll dig a little deeper as to what I mean on this specific statement. There are definitely a handful of meaningful rivalries across the landscape of professional sports, but nothing on the pro level, in my opinion, comes close to the length of time numerous college rivalries have endured. It's one of the primary reasons, in my opinion, it separates college fandom from pro fandom. And what began as regional rivalries in college football, for instance, a lot more times than not, centuries-old rivalries, they're now enjoyed annually by tens of millions of sports fans across the country who join in when blue bloods in football or blue blood football schools clash on the national TV presentation. And typically these have incredible ratings and wagering success, even if the audience's chosen school or conferences are not represented. I'm talking about clashes such as the Ohio State versus Michigan, Alabama, Auburn, USC, UCLA, Texas, Oklahoma in the Red River game, Georgia and Florida. That's over 100 years. Big Ten against Pac-12, Big Ten against Big 12, ACC versus SEC, SEC versus anybody and everybody, basically, in the last 20 years or so. In college football, the vast majority of the top talent seems to be concentrated in a handful of schools. And I think that makes it easy for the majority of casual fans to buy into any kind of event matchup by conference or by schools in college that occur consistently in college football, but in college basketball. Even though it may not often feel as though there are numerous schools or even numerous conferences that can claim that blue blood title, the conference that actually dominates on a consistent basis, especially the past 2 decades or so, isn't the conference that most of the sports media seems to favor in their hyping of the best, the way the SEC has actually delivered most, if not all, of the important metrics as the best in college football in that same amount of time the past 2 decades. In the past 2 decades, in college basketball, even though blue bloods, I'm talking about blue blood programs like Duke and North Carolina, even though they hail from the ACC and Kentucky and back-to-back Florida Gators hail from the SEC, there's a conference that actually has dominated more than those and all others. And this year's champion, the UConn Huskies, actually hail from that conference, the Big East. And the Big East was a big deal when I came up with Georgetown and St. John's. And there were a lot of good clashes back then. We don't hear much about the Big East as far as being a big basketball power in any way, football power either, over the years. But let's just take this into account. Since 1999, there have been, and we're going to use 1999, 20 was a COVID year. We knocked that one out. There have been 23 champions since 1999. And college basketball champions since 1999. Let's give an idea of this. In the Big East, you have UConn, 5 championships. You have Villanova, 2 championships, not a slouch at all. And Louisville and Syracuse each had 1. And then coming up right behind them, you have in the ACC, which is the one that's touted as the biggest and best, Duke and North Carolina representing quite well since 1999. Each have won 3 national championships. Maryland and Virginia each won 1 as well. The SEC, Florida was back-to-back, 2006, 2007. And Kentucky, which gets all the hype, they've only won 1 since 1999, and that was in 2012. Big 12, they've won 3. They've done really well recently with Kansas and Baylor, each winning championships recently. And the Pac-12, they have a big goose egg, unfortunately. Lots of players transition to the pros from the Pac-12, but not much is represented in the form of the conference winning championships. The first weekend and first rounds of games for this March Madness tournament, it was the most watched first round on record. Averaged a little over 9 million viewers per game. That's a huge win for the NCAA and its sponsorship partners. Now and moving forward, the approximately 50 million eyeballs that landed on the championship game was pretty good. I think actually great when considering in context, when you think about it, of the fractured nature of audiences today. So for a college basketball game on a Monday night, and you didn't have a lot of star power. Even though even UConn was in it, I mentioned a second ago that UConn's not necessarily seen, at least in the media on a whole, as a blue blood the way North Carolina and Duke happened to be in Kentucky. But they were in the game against the Cinderella team of San Diego State. And even with that game, just think of the culmination of everything else that happened in this particular tournament. This was the first time in the March Madness tournament's history that not a single 1, 2, or 3 seed even played in the Final Four. There was an overabundance of upsets. They were all strengthened by the gritty, I'm talking gut-wrenching and inspirational stories that filled every single unpredictable contest on the hardwood. In all 63 do-or-die single elimination games, the stakes are really, really high. I think that's why people gravitate towards this particular tournament for those 3 weeks. Headlines were dominated, and fans' headspace were dominated like no other event. The Super Bowl is a big spectacle, but this tournament is something a little different. Definitely not the behemoth that the Super Bowl happens to be, but it's no slouch. There were millions of fanatic wagerers all over the country, and I heard also in the world. It's become a big thing, enough for this whole bracketology thing this term to be almost considered a new science all on its own. It was a definitive win for the NCAA. It was a definitive win for its broadcasters and advertising partners, definitely. It was, as it always, especially the past 20 years, it's been a definitive win for all the players, coaches, and staff involved. I think career opportunities are strengthened significantly, not just in the field, the actual players in the field of sports, but in participating in such a truly unique event that can facilitate launching, I think, if you leverage it correctly, so many additional opportunities in life for those that participated. The NCAA, I think in this one particular instance, I think they finally got it right.